The NBA's summer of wheeling and dealing is off and running. Who's going to come out the other end with the biggest smile? And which team is the best bet to win next year's championship? And also the WNBA with perhaps its highest profile showdown in league history coming up on Friday night. And how on earth did the Lakers land Magic Johnson in the first place? And how that shaped the NBA for the next couple decades. All that and much more straight ahead. And don't forget, we're available everywhere you get your podcast. I'm Doug Kezirian, and this is Hard Pass. We begin Hoop Scoop with the NBA offseason. Just hours after it officially started with the end of Game 7 of the NBA Finals, teams are certainly wheeling and dealing, and Brad Stevens is at the top of the pack, already trading away two starters of that championship team within about a 15-hour period. The most recent one, Kristaps Porzingis, part of a three-team trade that goes to Atlanta that brings back George Niang, but most importantly gets the Celtics lower in the salary cap luxury area and gets them below the second apron. That's the key. The second apron is so important. So by trading away Zinger, Boston saves $150 million in luxury tax, and that the penalties nowadays are so stiff for that second apron, and that's why we're going to see such a wild summer, or at least expected to see that. Now, before that, late Monday night, Stevens traded Drew Holiday to Portland in exchange for Anthony Simons and 2 second-round picks. Now, the key here is the contracts. Simons is an expiring deal, and so Portland basically said, we're going to lose him next summer or could trade him this season as an expiring deal, like a big asset. So they went and got Drew Holiday. Now, that's strange because Holiday has 3 seasons remaining on his contract, over $100 million due, and he's 36 years old, just turned 36, and he's already declining production. Strange move, but Portland may now have the best defensive starting 5 in the NBA, and with Chauncey Billups at head coach, they're trending in the right direction, and they might be thinking, hey, we can get to that play-in game, something like that, and they could always trade Holiday down the road as an expiring deal. I don't like it, but that's the thought process. Meanwhile, Simons is 26, unlimited range, sort of a very poor man Steph Curry, but just has that kind of aspect to his game. And when you don't have Tatum this next coming season with the Achilles tear, then you may need some offense and off-the-dribble threes as well. Now, what this also illustrates is Brad Stevens knows what he's doing, right? He built this championship team in Boston by going and get Drew Holiday, Derek White, these key pieces, has Pritchard on a great contract. And now he's moving them. His number one job was to get below the second apron. He's done that. And he still has Tatum intact, still has Jaylen Brown, still has Pritchard, still has Derek White, also has now Anthony Simons, and he could move Brown for more players, or he's maintained all those first-round picks, those draft assets that he can make for other guys like Derek White, Drew Holiday that he did. So he can go find the supporting cast. This year is not completely lost. You never know if Tatum can come back, but the key is they got younger by trading Drew Holiday, who's a fantastic person and player, but declining. You have to focus on what's on the court, not what he and his wife do for that Boston community. So there's a lot to like with what Stevens is doing. As you would imagine, there's naturally been some reaction across social media as we shift now to a heat check. And Celtics fans are rejoicing, getting rid of that Drew Holiday contract. Look at Fred from Boston. Traded Kemba Walker for Al Horford. Traded Langford and a first-round pick for Derek White. Traded Marcus Smart for Porzingis, traded Rob Williams and Brogdon for Drew Holiday, extended all core pieces, traded an aging Drew Holiday for Anthony Simons and 2 second-round picks. Brad Stevens, generational. And I couldn't agree more. He really understands what it is. He's done so well building this championship team, and now he's trying to reload on the fly. Here's a funny one. Brad Stevens, when he calls around the league, Tony Soprano holding court for the Sopranos and his lieutenants and his captains, things like that. I mean, that's really how everyone views Brad Stevens now. At least I do. He's among the best. But It's crazy to think a guy who was such a good college coach at Butler, such a good NBA coach with Boston, and now he might even be a better general manager in running the front office. That's how good Stevens has been in my eyes, because he produced a championship caliber team, and now he's reloading on the fly. More trades, though, and we had the Durant one on Sunday. How about C.J. McCollum going to Washington? What's up with that? Well, this one contract-based as well. So the Pelicans and Wizards made a deal. The Pelicans, in exchange for McCollum, Kelly Olynyk, and a future second-round pick, get Jordan Poole, Saddiq Bey, and the 40th overall pick in Wednesday's draft. So a lot of moving pieces there, and it really comes down to contract length, and that's the key. McCollum is an expiring contract, so that's why they're giving up pieces like Jordan Poole and Saddiq Bey. So it's like, so now we'll see what the Pelicans do. They bring in a guy like Bey, who's a talent, and they bring in Jordan Poole, who has proved he can be a role player for a championship caliber team, because that's what he did in Golden State. Very different with the Wizards. He was a lost cause. He was gunning. It was a dysfunctional situation. For me, the more interesting part is Washington. And, why they went and got McCollum? Well, he's an expiring contract. They're not trying to win next year. First of all, he's an adult in the room. And when you saw him Poole and stuff behave last year, they have a lot of young guys with Alex Sarr, Coulibaly, Carrington, even Keyshawn George. You want a guy like C.J. McCollum behave. When I was at ESPN, Flip Saunders told me that was so important when he had these young guys that he drafted. He wanted the adult in the room. Garnett taught him how to be a professional, and that was what was so important. So you had that, and you can teach them, because you can't have all young guys. You got to have a couple veterans to make sure these young guys don't get derailed, and I think that's really important. So think about the Wizards. With McCollum being an expiring contract next year, next summer, next offseason, they're going to have nearly $100 million in salary cap space to spend on free agents. On top of that, they have that core of Sarr, Coulibaly, Carrington, Keyshawn George, 6th overall pick on Wednesday, 18th overall pick on Wednesday. And that's because Saddiq Bey and Jordan Poole didn't fit on their timeline. They were at a certain stage in their careers, so they wanted to trade him. So I wouldn't want Poole in my locker room. I want C.J. McCollum. So I certainly understand these moves that the Wizards are making. And as a front office that's been such a disaster, I actually really like what they're doing. They at least have a plan and a vision, and that's something I could not say for Washington in years past. All this wheeling and dealing going on with the NBA draft coming up Wednesday night. And for many months and a year, essentially, we've known Cooper Flagg out of Duke will be the #1 overall draft pick, and he's going to the Dallas Mavericks for now, at least maybe until a Giannis trade package or something like that. But the Mavericks will certainly be interesting adding Cooper Flagg. The question is, and I have, is just so much hype, but #1 picks haven't always materialized, i.e. Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz. That's just in recent years. Now, guys like Cade Cunningham and some others have certainly materialized. It's very difficult to scout a player at that age and project them, but what Cooper Flagg did with the Team USA scrimmages and things like that speaks volumes. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think his comparison is upside, his ceiling? Now, there's been some recent articles with some really high praise, like Scottie Pippen, Kawhi Leonard defensively, things like that. Jason Tatum, probably the most likely comp, but still, Tatum's all NBA, whatever it was, 5 straight years. That's pretty legit if Flagg ends up being that, but he's been so smooth and pure with his game. I just want to hear your thoughts. Is there any chance, like what percentage that he's a bust and doesn't materialize? See another Ben Simmons, like 5%, 3%? Very curious to hear everyone's reaction. Let us know in the comment section. Join the conversations, we like to say. And will there be someone else in the draft that is a better NBA player than Cooper Flagg? Now, you don't have to know who it is, but would you take Flagg or the field eventually down the road? Who's the better NBA player? A lot of times we see guys, even when there's a no-brainer at 1, that somebody else ends up being the star. And it's not necessarily the second pick, but there's the best player in a draft. Even when there's a no-brainer #1 is someone else. So that could be a situation here we have in this year's NBA draft. The marquee matchup over the next few days, undoubtedly in the WNBA. Huge platform, national television, and the first of what we think will be several high-profile showdowns between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers, the back-to-back last two #1 overall draft picks. We know about Caitlin Clark, right? Comes into the league, huge profile, and sort of struggled out of the gates a little bit because there was no rest between college, draft, and then her WNBA initiation, if you will. And there's just so many games right out of the gates. But eventually, she missed the Olympic break, calmed down, recharged batteries, and was awesome. And she ended up finishing 4th in MVP voting, all but 1 vote. So nearly unanimous for Rookie of the Year award and first team all WNBA, led the league in assists, took the Indiana Fever to the playoffs for the first time in several years. So certainly a successful rookie season for Caitlin Clark. Now, she came to a team with more talent with Kelsey Mitchell, who was already an all-star, Aaliyah Boston, a former #1 overall pick. But this year, high expectations for sure. She came in as the MVP betting favorite. Most of that was just popularity, but still, Fever among the candidates to win the WNBA championship. Now, as for Paige Bueckers, different situation. Came into a team with less surrounding talent, but they're also different players. Bueckers comes in having won the national championship at UConn and obviously also the #1 overall pick. But there's much more to her game that's different than Caitlin Clark. Clark is more fiery, more vocal, has the logo range, and a riskier player with her passes and some of her shots. Bueckers much more efficient, team-oriented. In fact, her teammates and coaches are encouraging her to shoot more. She's such an effective player, but she's just so focused on team and not shooting enough. Now, in my opinion, her teammate, Arike Ogunbowale, perennial all-star and Olympian, is sort of doing more harm than good. If I'm running the Dallas Wings, I trade Ogunbowale for package prospects, things like that, players that surround Paige Bueckers. I would build around Bueckers. I think Ogunbowale is a gunner, and I don't think you can win an elite level when you have that much inefficiency in your game. So, for my opinion is I would trade Ogunbowale, build around Paige Bueckers. We'll see what they do. But Bueckers, her scoring's going up. Everything, she fills up the stat sheet. Certainly a quieter player than Caitlin Clark, but a star nonetheless. So this should be, like I said, the first of many showdowns between these two. Clark's team's better. Clark's team's likely going to the playoffs. The Wings are not. But this is going to be an electric atmosphere as they move the game to the American Airlines Center where the Mavericks play, 20,000 plus capacity instead of the usual arena for the Dallas Wings, 7,000 plus. Let's talk some gambling and betting 101, and we'll talk about the NBA futures market, which is the championship odds for next year. Oklahoma City was the favorite entering the postseason, ended up winning the title, and they are the favorite, which I think is legit, and that's fair, but I think they're too much of a favorite. This team certainly showed some issues along the way. 2 7-game series against what we thought was inferior teams. They played with their food a lot. They're not a powerhouse or juggernaut by any means. And on top of that, it's a new NBA. It's a new era. The last 7 years, we've had 7 different champions. The league used to be one where everything was so predictable because of the best of 7 format, so you get the truer outcome. At the beginning of the season, we'd think there'd be like 2 or 3 championship possibilities. It's not the case anymore. So yes, the Thunder were among the favorites at the beginning of the year, but it was close. They do have the reigning league MVP. They are young. They have draft capital and a bunch of first-round picks for this year and also the coming years. They should be the favorite, but I think the odds are skewed. Let's take a look at those. And Thunder are your plus 200, plus 225 favorites. That's all in relation to 100. So that's like 2-1 odds, a little over 2-1 odds, right? Then there's another tier, Rockets, Cavs, and Knicks, all around 8-1 or 7.5-1, things like that. Rockets, of course, just acquired Kevin Durant. Cavs were the 1 seed in the East, untouched right now. Knicks don't have a coach, but the Eastern Conference is wide open. And then another tier of teams, T-Wolves, Lakers, Nuggets, Warriors, all Western Conference teams, and then a couple Eastern teams with Boston and Orlando. And it's really tough to kind of anticipate what's going to happen. What's Boston going to do after these trades? Are they going to blow it all up and reload for a year? Or are they going to kind of hover and kind of maybe make a run in the East? And that's the big thing. The Eastern Conference is so much weaker than the West. And while the Thunder and all those teams have to cannibalize one another and you have to beat 3 good teams to get to the finals, that's not the case for the East because they have the Achilles injuries. Haliburton, Tatum, and Damian Lillard, all where uniform 0, by the way, and it's wide open. So I think the Cavs at plus 850, they're the Eastern Conference favorite. I know it's no fun to bet on a favorite, but I think that's the right move. I think losing this year to the Pacers in the second round will help them. They have the right coach in Kenny Atkinson. Donovan Mitchell's a star. They have Mobley. They have the right pieces. I like what they did at this trade deadline. It just didn't work out this year, but sometimes you need to struggle to get over the hump the following year. The East is open, but I think the Cavs are the team to beat. And if you don't like betting favorites, I'll remind you, the Oklahoma City Thunder were around 9-1 last summer to win it all, and then they became the favorites and really. So I know just because we haven't seen it done yet doesn't mean it can't be done. Look at the Thunder. We were doubting them, and then they got it done. I think the Cavs can make that run through the East, have home court advantage in the finals, and you have a really good ticket on your hands at plus 850. So with all this unknown this coming summer, you know the Cavs are going to be legit and the favorites out East. This year's NBA draft, Wednesday, June 25th, the same day of the NBA draft in 1979. And it was an important draft because it affected the league for the next several decades. It was the year the Lakers took Magic Johnson #1 overall. Again, 1979, fresh off winning the national championship as Michigan State beat Larry Bird and Indiana State in the title game. But really all this started 3 and even 4 years ago. Let's go back to 1976. The Lakers had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as their center. He won MVP. It was his first year since acquiring him in a trade with the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, Gail Goodridge was their shooting guard and point guard, and he had just come off a season where he was the second leading scorer, but he was unhappy, and so he was going to become a free agent the following year. The year prior, he had held out, and so he had a clause coming up after the 1976 season that would allow him to become a free agent. Now, during this time in the NBA, nothing like it is today, where we understand the importance of draft capital and especially lottery picks and protection of lottery picks. But in this era, there was a bunch of draft compensation swapped around amongst owners and front offices. No one really knew the exact value of future picks and things like that. One other important note is that the league wanted to discourage free agency. So what the league mandated at the time, when a player left a team, even when he was a free agent, compensation packages were required in response. So Gail Goodridge wanted to go play in New Orleans with Pistol Pete Maravich in 1976. So the league required there be a compensatory package. And that package for the New Orleans Jazz, mind you, before the Jazz relocated to Salt Lake, the Jazz would receive the Lakers' second-round pick in 77 and a first-round pick in 78 in exchange for the right to sign Goodridge, first-round picks the next 3 years of the Jazz, 77, 78, and 79, and also a second-round pick in 80. So that's what the league thought was fair. Well, it just so turns out a few years later, in the 1978-79 season, the Jazz ended up having the single worst record in the Western Conference. Pete Maravich and Gail Goodridge were both getting a little older. Goodridge was 36 at the time, maybe 35, and they only played 49 games together. So they had the worst record, and then the Bulls had the worst record in the East. Now, record-wise, Jazz actually had the single worst record, but that's not how it was done. Worst record in each conference, and then there was a coin flip. The coin flip, oh so important to a couple franchises. Now, remember, the Lakers own the rights of this pick. There's some conspiracy theories out there because the Jazz were coached by former Laker Elgin Baylor at the time, but that's neither here nor there. He wasn't tanking for his former team. He was the head coach of the New Orleans Jazz. So the coin flip ends up being tails. That means the Lakers win instead of the Bulls. So the Lakers got the #1 pick in 1979, and they add Magic Johnson to a team like with Kareem, Jamal Wilkes, Michael Cooper, Norm Nixon. And this is a team that had just been eliminated in the conference semis by the Seattle Sonics, who went on to win the title. So this was a quality team. They had an MVP in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and now they get to add Magic Johnson, who just dominated college basketball, won the national title, like I said, beating Larry Bird and Indiana State. So the Lakers catch the break. If it were heads, the Bulls would get the #1 pick, and then maybe they draft Magic Johnson, probably because he was such a star in college. And that means they would not have had a bad enough record a handful of years later, to draft Michael Jordan. So the Lakers get Magic, Showtime is born, and then a handful of years later, the Bulls, who had the number 3 pick that year, got Michael Jordan, and then he goes on to win 6 titles in the Windy City. So all because of Gail Goodridge in 1976, or really 1975, when he was forced to switch from shooting guard to point guard, unhappy with his contract, and he wanted to go elsewhere. So in 1976, he ends up going to New Orleans, and that sets the table for a few years later when the Lakers got the Jazz's pick in 1979, which just happened to be the stud out of Michigan State, Magic Johnson. It's time now to hear from our fans in the stands, and that's you making comments in the YouTube comments section. And we love to get the feedback. Let us know your input, positive, negative, likes, dislikes, what you want to see more of, which segments have you liked the most. Of course, we love Arthur the most, right? But in all seriousness, let us know your thoughts. We'd love to shape the show accordingly. Some recent comments when I asked if there was an asterisk next to OKC's Game 7 victory and subsequent, obviously, NBA championship. Free Sauce says, I don't know if Indy would have won, but there's always going to be that asterisk next to the SGA title. The fact that it even had to go to a Game 7 against the Pacers when the OKC were unequivocally the better team with the better star shows how mortal SGA and OKC are. No team fears them anymore. And I agree. And I talked about it earlier in the show, projecting to the futures market. This is not a dominant team necessarily. It's a team that should be the favorite for next year, but they showed some issues. Like I said, 5-5 on the road in the postseason, despite being favored in all 10 games. And then on top of that, they were 1-9 against the point spread. They are certainly beatable, even though they did definitely flex their muscles in a few game 4s when down 2-1 or up 2-1. Those were really impressive game 4 performances with so much at stake. So I give them a lot of credit, as much as I don't think they are a dominant team. Another comment, I still think OKC wins a close game, but it sucks Haliburton went down. That was the hypothetical if Haliburton had never got hurt. But man, what a spark McConnell gave Indy for a stretch there. Hallie going down definitely affected Indy's depth. They definitely got worn down. And we saw that, 22-4 run, crossing over the third and fourth quarters. Injuries are part of the game. And it is what it is, but it is a woulda, coulda, shoulda, and definitely a fun hypothetical to discuss because Haliburton started so strong. In first 5 minutes of the game, 3 of 4 from downtown, had 9 points just like that. And it was a tight game. And they even led it by 1 at the break. Remember, don't forget that. It was a lopsided game by the end, but Indy led by 1 point at the break. But OKC is certainly a worthy champion, but an understandably disheartened Pacers fan base for sure. That's going to do it for this edition of Hard Pass. We always appreciate you checking us out. And like we said, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, posts on this channel as well.